Re-
Hello, my name is Eamon Roche, and I'm delighted to be here today to speak about interventions and invitations on behalf of the legacy. And the legacy that I'm speaking about is that of my father, Kevin Roche, and his firm, Kevin Roche, John Dinkley and Associates. So I got involved with the firm in about 2018 at the invitation of my father. At that time, he was in the final year of his life, and he needed help in running the firm and wrapping up affairs. At that time, we believed that we were not going to be moving into the future. Happily, we have. But at that time, I really understood my job being client-facing, finishing the projects that we had. And in terms of legacy, there was a large component having to do with an archive project that we had been prosecuting for about 12 years at that point, having to do with getting all of the firm's written and drawn body of work over to the archive at Yale. And so Linda Cinto, who is our archivist in-house, had been overseeing that project and actually continued to oversee the project until about 2 months ago, when she happily concluded what ended up being a 17-year effort. There's a lot I didn't know getting into this field. I was in the related field of construction and development, but one of the things in particular I failed to understand is that we were going to be called upon repeatedly to stand up for the work that we had built. I didn't understand how endangered that work was, but Liz Wakus and the Docomomo team very quickly apprised me of that. So it wasn't long that I'd been in the saddle before I was called, and the firm in turn was called to jump into the fray on behalf of defending our built work. I'm now joined at the firm by my partner, Jerry Baricca, and we're going forward into the future, and we continue with these engagements. And today, what I wanted to kind of focus on is looking at some of these engagements over the last 5 years. So they fall into roughly two categories. And the first I've termed interventional legacy work, and that would be those times that Docomomo, leading the charge, has brought us into their slipstream to stand up for the work. And that often takes a fairly, let's say, pointed or confrontational, even at times, approach, because often you're contra management in those efforts. But we're happy to do that, falling in line behind Docomomo and their advocacy. The other kind of legacy work that we do is invitational. So typically, a new owner will get in front of us and say, look, we have this building, we don't understand these things about it. And they're right not to understand, because at that point, they might be the fifth or sixth owner of a building, and there's been successive renovations, and the original meaning, the original program has sort of been subsumed underneath layers of bad design over the years. So in those cases, our job is to really sit with them and do a very thoughtful presentation and enlighten them as to the real genesis of the design. And those are really fun engagements. So I'm going to start with two of the interventions, and then we'll go on to two of the invitations. And the first two that I'm going to show, these interventions, they both are in New York City. And we're going to start with 60 Wall Street. So this is a great view of the building. It's 1.7 million square feet. And actually, we were aware of the fact that there were plans afoot to, let's say, refresh the building. The building had lost its prime tenant, which is Deutsche Bank. They moved to Midtown. So the sovereign wealth fund that owned the building was in need of releasing the building. Now, this was just before COVID hit. But even in that environment, they had their work cut out for them. And we tried to get in front of them. We thought, who better to rethink the building than our own firm. At the time, my dad was still with us, so we thought it'd be really great if he could have jumped into that. We got close, but we didn't get quite as far as we needed to along that road to get to the upper level decision makers to really kind of pitch our case. Ultimately, it fell to KPF to handle this assignment. Now, we're going to look at the building. This obviously is the Colonnade on Wall Street, and it's a very contextual building. It's a very postmodern building. It's on a very narrow street. Here you see the rare moment of sunshine enlivening the facade, but it's a very contextual building, and it has its admirers, and in particular, it has its admirers, including myself, with this pedestrian way at the interior. So this interior is actually a half-acre site that became part of the building envelope as a public way, connects Pine Street back over to Wall Street. And it's almost a commons in that neighborhood, and is even more important now that that neighborhood's gotten increasingly residential. So we're very fond of this interior, and we're not alone. We weren't aware of what KPF was really going to be up to until Docomomo let us see these images. And this is what KPF was proposing. There's a bit of an artistic license taken here. Obviously, you could never actually have this view of the building. It's on a narrow street. I'm not going to comment on it, except to say it's obviously clearly very much of the current time. This design does not relate to the tower that it supports. So the pedestal now is disassociated from the tower above it, as well as the buildings adjacent to it. And, I'd also maybe question the amount of greenery that could actually be supported in this kind of environment. But I mean, the point here was, how to push back on this. And this is where I would say that there are these political realities as well. KPF is a firm, of course, it's a great firm. It's a firm we have a lot of respect for. It's a firm we've actually worked with before. And Gene Cohen, who recently passed, was a wonderful man, and truly a friend of my father. And he's been very kind to me as well. So we have nothing but great things to say about Gene. And so at the time, I didn't really want to go on record. My father had passed, Gene was still with us. I didn't really want to go on record as, saying anything about the building in particular. But what I thought we could do, here's another KPF rendering about over on the west side of the site. So this is that pedestrian way again, you can see it's a common way, and it leads down to the 2-3 line. So I thought maybe our job in this case was to get information out there and go back into our archives and really tell the story of what the building was, how it came to be, why it was important, and let other people make the decision. And that's what we did. And actually, working with Docomomo, we came to the attention of a journalist at the Times, and she did an excellent job at taking a lot of information that we gave her and writing, I think, a really compelling article, which was part of the effort to educate people about this building. And that education was important. Docomomo's efforts, as always, were really, really productive. And they actually created a pause point for further consideration to be had about what was there and what might be lost if, in particular, this great common public space were to be lost. So that was our involvement on that project. And then about the same time, in the last few years, Docomomo brought us a project that actually, although we have a lot of knowledge of the Museum of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, we didn't actually realize that Beyer Blinder Bell was going to be redoing this. Right here, you can see this southern facade. It's the Rockefeller wing. So we were actually kind of floored that this glazing was going to be redone, and it was going to be redone in a way that we thought was really discrepant from the original aesthetic of the building. Obviously, this building has a lot of influence in terms of the Crystal Palace as an input, and the gridding of that glass, the scale of that glass, the kind of greenhouse references are all super important. And BBB, this is not a happy photo. I mean, there were issues with this glazing from the outset, but they were compounded by the fact that there was a poor maintenance program. So there'd been different films put on the glass. This is a south-facing facade, so that's another kind of problematical reality to it, to which we're not insensitive. But also the fact that this is a tilted facade, this captured glazing does retain debris. So it's a challenging facade, and we understand that. However, we think contextually, the fact that it does have this texture is really, really important, and this scale is very important. So you really couldn't take a worse picture of what we built, but fair enough, it's reality. However, what we really had a problem with was, and I was kind of shocked when I saw this, but this expanse, this monolithic expansive glass. So this is now all silicon glaze. You've lost the articulation of the captured glazing. And of course, you've gone from double glaze to triple glaze. And we understand to meet the energy code today, and to also meet the needs of the conservators, it's going to have to be a much thicker skin, let's put it that way. But we didn't think that it had to be this. So we were able to get on the docket. Docomomo helped us with landmarks preservation. We were able to testify. We were able to, along with a lot of other people, advocate for not granting a landmarks approval for this and actually stopping the project. And in that time, although I mean they weren't happy for our involvement initially, maybe at all, but we were able to be in a very congenial format with BBB and have a bunch of offline conversations with them. We were able to do a lot of our own homework on what was the best glazing that could be done under the circumstances. We went out to our manufacturers, we had samples made. We came to the same unfortunate conclusion that if you're going to keep a south-facing expanse of glass on a museum, it probably can't be captured, and it has to be silicon glazed. But we were able to get a little more articulation. We were able to argue for smaller panel sizes on the glazing. So, we moved the needle a bit, not as far as I would have hoped, but we also, I think of a mindset that we did do the homework and did realize that this is the best that could be done under the circumstances with the needs that this facade had to fulfill. So at least it's no longer a question, at least not in our minds. And the aesthetics improved marginally. So that was the sort of fruit of our engagement in that regard. Not exactly what we wanted, but we turned up and we got the results we could. Now we're going to move on to two projects that really speak to an invitation. And this first one is also in New York. It's at the United Nations Plaza Hotel. Interestingly enough, the only reason that we got an invitation in the first place is because Docomomo had been successful in getting the interior of this hotel, portions of the interior. In particular, I'm going to talk about the Ambassador Grill, but they got them landmarked. And this is the landmarked interior of the most recent vintage of any landmark interior in New York City. So that's quite an accomplishment. And this Ambassador Grill is a real favorite of mine. It's just an incredibly great example of this period of architecture and this period of our firm's work. And what's really exciting about these two images here, you can see on the left is actually a model that we made in the office, and on the right is a photo of the actual original interior. And there's a few changes with how the skylight's handled here. The geometries are a bit different, but just an incredible effort in model making. And actually an incredible result as well. What we're looking at here is a completely subterranean restaurant. So the skylight was a really key component in enlivening that space and having the illusion that there's an opening here. And the way that's achieved is really clever. I'm going to show you in a second in a section drawing, but here's just two more images of the interior. Again, on the left, the model. And I just can't help but noting that all of these little bottles were made by hand in the office at the time, and very, very lovingly put on the shelf. And here's the actual finished photo, really quite amazing. So the way that this worked, actually, we're just going to talk about the skylight for a second. So you can see here in sections, so it's sort of a double skin. The lower skin here, closest to the diner, would be made out of a mylar that's both reflective but has transparency, through which you look into this void. The void is illuminated, and then you have this pentagonal form that's mirrored up above. And so between the reflection, refraction, and the vision through, you really have this delightful feeling that you're outside, under the stars almost. And here's an example of a page that we put together for ownership to really let them understand what they had. The reason they didn't know what they had is because just because something's been landmarked doesn't mean that the owner is compelled to actually restore it to its original condition. It just means the owner is enjoined from doing further damage. So this is what the skylight looked like after landmarking. And you can see what's happened is the glazing here, the lowest level here of the skin has been opacified. So you can't actually look into that kaleidoscopic upper layer of the skylight. So it was really shut down. And hotels do this, they constantly update their FF&E. And so the room had just completely lost its meaning. There's little peaks of the original floor in here, which were important, but that's about all that's left of the original interior. And so what we were successful in doing is, we wanted a fuller engagement, or the fullest engagement we could have, to really go in and redo the interior. But, they did their own FF&E. Again, I think probably partly due to our advocating for what it could be, definitely more sympathetic to the original interior than the previous fit ups, but they were able to retool the skylight and at least to get it to work. So you now have this double skin, and you now have the light, and you now have the drama of the space returned. So I think this is a great example of sort of a 1-2 punch of Docomomo coming in and shoring things up, making sure they can't get any worse, and then the opportunity to kind of come back incrementally and advance the interior back to where it wanted to be, or where it was originally. So this was a great follow-up to Docomomo's great efforts, and it was a lot of fun for us to do. And the last example I'm going to talk about is not in New York. It's at Bank of America Plaza in Atlanta. So again, this is a bank building that we did, just like the JP Morgan building that we looked at, 60 Wall Street. This was for Nations Bank originally, and then later Bank of America. And this building was bought by a developer, and they wanted to, in similar way to Wall Street, they wanted to basically bring the lobby and the public spaces current to attract new tenants. So look, we weren't insensitive to the need to do that. This is an original photo on the left, and there's these quite lovely pendant fixtures here. Those had all been lost, but you're left with the granite and the kind of postmodern approach that might be hard to market today. So we can understand that. One thing that we were really amazed by was when we started to look at this, we realized if we stripped the surfaces away, you can see on the right here, and just kind of did a fade to white, we realized how strong and really how modernist, even though this is a very postmodern building, that the handling of space was. And so we love these geometries, and we thought, well, maybe we can just reskin this interior. We can maintain all of the mechanicals. It'd be tremendously effective environmentally to do so. So, we jumped in. This was an active competition, and we thought we would give it our best shot. If anyone was going to redo it, we wanted it to be our firm. So pulling the aesthetic from the spire, where you have this backlit trellis that creates the spire, we decided to use that same idea in a much different way, in a much finer grained way, and create these sort of light boxes. Here we're lofting these curves with a fiberglass rod that has the advantage of being able to cover a very large arc length in an unbroken way. So we thought that gave it a lot of integrity, and it's a very luminous, beautiful material. So we were basically going to dress all the surfaces with fiberglass, behind which you could have lights in here. And so you'd have this nice inversion day to night where, the positive and negative values would flip. So we thought this was an elegant way to bring the lobby forward and to keep the main feeling of the space and be true to the original design of the building, while also making it much more sort of contemporary. So the bittersweet part is we didn't get the job. But the silver lining, I suppose, is that the firm that did get the job, which was Gensler, did a very similar approach. And I'm not sure if that's because they saw our presentation, although there are many elements of our presentation that were repeated in their presentation. So it could be just coincidence, I'm not sure. But they've done a more kind of conventional slat wall approach to lofting those curves. So, I'm glad that the geometries will be maintained, let's say. I think that's really important. Here at the exterior, they were proposing bumping out with a hospitality concept. We had proposed a different version of the same idea, but I just want to kind of go back to the exterior again. Here's the spire at night. You can see why it's such an affecting piece of architecture. It's also the highest built structure in Atlanta. And then we wanted to kind of use that landmark spire. I say landmark in quotes, but we want to kind of bring this very signature spire down to the ground. And so this is a little bit of a whimsical idea of how to bring that energy down to the ground. And here we have, there's 4 portals into the building, and we thought that we could take the postmodernist facades that frame those portals, and we could just sort of dress them in a trellis inspired by the spire and backlight it, and you'd have that same day-night inversion. And then through the portal, you can see a finer grained approach to that same aesthetic at the interior that we'd seen earlier. So that concludes my remarks. And I would just say a couple things in conclusion. First of all, as a firm, it's been incredibly energizing for us to do these different legacy research projects. So whether they're for a Docomomo-led intervention or whether they're for ownership on an invitation, for us to go back into our archives, back into our firm's history, especially, for me, I'm new to the firm, relatively new, just 5 years. For our younger team members, it's been a real eye-opener. For our more senior project captains, some of whom did these projects, they were still at the firm, it's a great chance for them to go back in and for us all to come together and really understand a lot about the firm's history and design and process. So that's been fascinating. Internally, it's been incredibly beneficial. I think externally, it's been a variety of different stances with which we've engaged, whether through intervention or invitation, different outcomes. But they've all moved the needle. They've all been worth it. And going forward, we're going to continue to always answer the call for Docomomo, get behind them on projects, and always be there for new owners to answer questions and hopefully bring the work forward into the future. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.